Hello, my name is David, and in this video I'll be covering how I created Hunted by Moonlight, the 7th film in my Dinosauria Animated Series. This behind the scenes video will cover everything from my initial sketchbook work, my ideas, how I animate, and everything in between, including this big clay sculpture I made of the film's main character. The animations may be the final result, but there is so much more that goes into each and every one of these projects. So, let's get started. Hunted by Moonlight is actually an idea I've had since the very start of this series. You see, the Dinosauria series started back in 2020 with a film I made called Old Buck, which I enjoyed working on so much that I immediately decided to expand it into a whole series of dinosaur-themed films. But the initial concept I had in mind was to make each film as experimental and as unique as possible. And one of the very first ideas I had for this series was a film called Forbidden Fruit. This film was gonna be a dark, gothic fairy tale horror film, and wasn't going to be paleo accurate whatsoever. It featured heavily stylized retro dinosaurs animated in a fake stop-motion-like style. This here is how different the Dinosauria Animated Series almost was. I liked a lot about this idea, but the more the Dinosauria series took shape as we know it now, the less Forbidden Fruit really fit within it. And while I did eventually get to animate some retro dinosaurs in Terrible Lizards, it was actually the gothic fairy tale story and spooky atmosphere of Forbidden Fruit that really drew me to the concept, both of which served as the foundation of what would eventually become Hunted by Moonlight. But because this idea has been in the back of my mind for almost 5 years, it's gone through a bunch of different revisions. The most notable of which was a scrapped version of this film set in Cenozoic Argentina. This version of the film would have featured the New World monkey Homunculus and the terror bird Forus Racus in the two main roles. As you can see, I even started 3D modelling and rigging these two characters. I remember pivoting the setting from Cenozoic to Mesozoic specifically after discovering Brian Eng's paleoart reimagining Dilophosaurus based on all the latest research, which totally inspired me. I had finally found my Guillermo del Toro fairy tale monster. Speaking of which, it probably comes as no surprise that this film is heavily inspired by dark, gothic fairy tales. These famous stories like Hansel and Gretel and Red Riding Hood were originally written to be scary, cautionary warnings to teach children of the dangers of the world. And Hunted by Moonlight is presented exactly like one of these fairy tales. It's a story about a bunch of troublesome children who are tempted by suspicious sweet treats, leave the safety of home, wander too far into the woods, and are attacked by horrible monsters in the dead of night. For each of the films in my Dinosauria series, I've created large clay sculptures of the star species. For Hunted by Moonlight, I of course decided to sculpt a Scutellosaurus. Based on this piece of concept art, I started this piece by creating a skeleton of aluminium foil and wire, which I then covered in a thin layer of DAS air drying clay and Milliput. In layers, I then slowly bulked out the piece, added arms and bored peg holes into the gnarled tree branch base so the dinosaur could securely stand on top of it. The scaly skin of this Scutellosaurus was created using my usual methods. With these pre-made texture plates, I create patches of skin, which I then dress the model with. Any extra details like scale variation and skin folds are then carved on top. The final sculpting step were the scutes of this Scutellosaurus. These were all balled up, sculpted and applied one by one. Once I was happy with the finished sculpt, I accidentally tried to prime the piece with a spray varnish, then correctly primed it with a spray primer, and painted the piece with acrylic paints and brushes. Painting the base was relatively easy, but I must have repainted the Scutellosaurus itself like 3 or 4 times before I finally settled on these exact blue and pink hues. I think the finished sculpture is quite striking. The gnarled tree branch base covered in mushrooms really evokes the gothic fairy tale feel of the film, which is perfectly matched with the childlike innocence and curiosity of the Scutellosaurus perched on top. I'm still not overly happy with the paint job though, and while I think the silhouette of this piece is probably its strongest feature, little details like the twist of the tail and just how bowed this leg is kinda bother me. But besides that, I really warmed to this little sculpture. Here he is next to the Megalosaurus from my previous film, Terrible Lizards. And here he is with the rest of the Dinosauria sculpture family. The star species of this film is Scutellosaurus. These little dinosaurs were less than 2 meters long and were covered in hundreds of small, bony osteoderms. These humble, armoured little guys were basal thyreophorian dinosaurs, the group that would eventually give rise to the stegosaurs and the ankylosaurs, some of the coolest and most heavily defended animals to ever exist. I intended the 3 Scutellosaurus in the film to be siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. There's the older brother, who is the most rambunctious and troublesome of the 3, and bears the scars of his many misadventures. Then there's the older sister, just as playful as her brothers, but easily the most sensible, cautious, and caring of the group. And finally, the youngest of the 3 is our main character, who follows and mimics everything his older brother does, even if it goes against his own instincts. Considering that they all likely came from the same clutch of eggs, they're not literally older or younger than one another. Those are just the relationships I was imagining while writing and animating the film. The next animal I'll be talking about is Ceratosaurus, which was a basal sauropodomorph. Again, very humble beginnings, as this group would eventually give rise to some of the largest and most impressive creatures to ever exist. But as you can see, Ceratosaurus was actually quite small, only about 4 meters long and roughly the height of a human being. The third animal I'll be talking about is, of course, Dilophosaurus, a theropod dinosaur that, thanks to Jurassic Park, is known to most people as the little venom-spitting dinosaur with the big frill that kills Wayne Knight. The real animal, of course, wasn't venomous, it didn't have a neck frill, and was also a lot larger than its movie counterpart. As you can see, in life, Dilophosaurus would have totally dwarfed its Jurassic Park co-star, Velociraptor. Dilophosaurus was in fact much larger than anything else in its ecosystem, multiple times larger than the animals it was hunting. At 6 meters in length, it was actually easily one of the largest land predators of its day. The most distinctive feature of Dilophosaurus are definitely its namesake crests. But these iconic structures are surprisingly not very well known. The fossils we have are super fragmentary. We don't actually know their size or shape. In fact, the more I researched, the more surprised I was that I've never seen these crests reconstructed in more extravagant and speculative ways. This is why I decided to cover these crests and feathers, instead of the keratin you often see in reconstructions. There are 3 different Dilophosaurus in the film, and their roles were written to mirror the 3 Scutellosaurus. We have the largest and the eldest, who is heavily scarred, just like the older brother. We have the second eldest, a female who remains home and out of the action for most of the film, just like the older sister. And finally, the main antagonist, Dilophosaurus, is the youngest, smallest, and least experienced of the 3, mirroring our main Scutellosaurus character, both of which finish the film with lesson learning fresh wounds as well. With all of the big and obvious names out of the way now, I feel the need to discuss the weirder little critters of this film. The first of which I want to talk about is Ramphinian, which was a small pterosaur. This animal's exact phylogenetic placement is tricky because of how fragmentary the fossils are. I decided to reconstruct the animal closer to Dimorphodon than Rhamphorhynchus, which I think is fine for what we know of the animal so far. The next little critter I want to talk about, and the first animal we actually see in the film, is Eocecilia. Caecilians, for those of you who don't know, are a fascinating little group of worm-like, totally limbless and mostly blind amphibians that are still alive today. Eocecilia is a superbasal one, found in the Kayenta Formation, that still has its tiny little legs. Next, we have some snails, which were unironically one of the most enjoyable creatures I've had to create for this whole series. There's something genuinely wonderful about lovingly recreating an animal so regular. And finally, in the film we see the remains of a Scutellosaurus, multiple Ceratosaurus, and a single Kayentasuchus. I really wanted to include one of the Kayenta Formation's crocodilomorphs in the film, but couldn't find an excuse to properly feature one within the confines of the story. Unfortunately, a small, simple Kayentasuchus skull cameo was all I could really squeeze in. Before I move on to the next segment, I just wanted to say that if you want to support the Dinosauria series, please check out my Patreon page. Not only can you read the sketchbooks I've been showing off in this video, but I also post weekly updates on my progress and renders, like the ones on screen right now. Thank you. I create these films using a mix of 2D and 3D animation. The environments are 2D elements which I paint in Photoshop, and the characters are 3D models that I animate in Blender. People call my animation style cel-shaded, but that's not really correct. My 3D models actually aren't shaded at all. All the light you're seeing on this Dilophosaurus, for example, is fake. It's a texture which has been painted directly onto the skin. The great thing about this approach is that it blends these 3D models into the 2D backgrounds very well. The downside is that the lighting on these characters is totally fixed. I can't really relight a character without at least partially repainting it. Light and shadow are key parts of this film's aesthetic, and to help combat this lighting limitation, I created multiple skin variants for each character. Each character had at least a shadowed skin and a brighter skin. The shadowed skins were used for most of the film, and the brighter skins, which were more detailed, were used for select shots. mostly close-ups. I think the most immediately striking thing about Hunted by Moonlight are its colours. I absolutely love playing with strong, heavily stylised, unnatural colours in my films, and the Dinosauria series is no stranger to this. But I wanted to take this a little bit further with Hunted by Moonlight, with its use of blues, purples, and pinks. These colours don't just add to the heightened reality fairy tale vibe, they also serve the story. This film is set at night in a spooky forest, and these blues and purples are cold and dark. The brightest parts of each scene are directly illuminated by the titular Moonlight. The pinks in this film purposefully clash with this colour scheme. They're a little ugly, they're a little toxic, but it's where your eye is drawn to. These pinks represent anything and everything dangerous and alluring in the film. The original soundtrack of this film was created by Ivan Duch, and I love this soundtrack. It's incredible. Ivan and I immediately agreed on exactly what sound this film should have from the very start. And what he created, I think, is the perfect blend of scary and unnerving, mixed with an utterly essential fairy tale, childlike wonder, innocence, and mischief. Ivan plans to make his own behind-the-scenes video on his channel covering exactly how he created the music for this film, which I will link below when it becomes available. I seriously encourage all of you to check Ivan's music out and support his wonderful work. I like this film a lot. It has a strong and pleasant art style, the story is compelling, and the whole thing is paced very well. But the film is far from perfect, and I have two main problems with it. The first is how I portrayed the setting. I do love this tall, foreboding, dying woodland environment, and I think I chose it subconsciously to help add to the scary fairy tale vibe of the film. The problem is, this isn't really what the Kayenta formation would have been like. The film is actually set in a forest oasis in the middle of an arid desert, which you can see for a brief moment at the beginning in this environmental wide shot, but the rest of the film really doesn't portray that well at all, instead looking more like a temperate redwood forest. The second thing that bothers me about this film is my portrayal of the Dilophosaurus. You see, I really enjoy portraying even the biggest and scariest carnivores in my films with a realistic amount of compassion. These were real animals who would have had violent moments and peaceful moments, but they weren't evil or malicious. Some of my films, like A More Ancient Spring, even make a point of this, portraying the Gorgosaurus as a villain at the start of the film, but as the film progresses, the animal is then shown to be a necessary, healthy part of the ecosystem with reason behind its actions. However, for the purposes of Hunted by Moonlight and its very simple fairy tale structure, this type of nuance clashed with the concept. For this film to work the way I wanted it to work, these Dilophosaurs had to be literal monsters, and had to be seen exclusively from the perspective of their prey. Against my better judgment, I kind of had to omit any moment of peace or compassion in these animals for the sake of the story. But other than those two relatively minor things, I actually really like this film. I came up with this concept almost 5 years ago, and it's really satisfying to see the idea finally realised. I think my absolute favourite thing about Hunted by Moonlight is just how unique it feels. As far as dinosaur media goes, I'm not sure anyone else has done a fairy tale horror story. I'm usually super critical of my own work, but even now, after rewatching this film 20,000 times over the course of its production, it still feels really new and fresh to me. And I'm very proud of that. I'd say it's my favourite of the series if it weren't for the next film, Monsters Down Under, which I think I'm starting to like a little bit more. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to support me or support this series, please check out my Patreon page. I post frequent updates and renders over there, like the ones on screen right now, and for just $5, you can gain early access to my animated short films and even read through all my sketchbook work I've been showing off in this video. I just uploaded the second chunk of my Dinosauria Volume 2 sketchbook, and more will be added as the series goes on. Super special thanks to all my top Patreon supporters scrolling by on screen right now. Without all of these people, gigantic animated projects like these would not be possible. So again, thank you.